Now that the party is over, we can start settling down to do some serious business. As you might remember, this exhibition is a retrospective exhibition picking up the work between 1985 and 2000. However, in this room, we are going to get some kind of an introduction, namely works between 1952 and 1985 are going to be shown, since the development of an artist cannot be cut by a pair of scissors. So basically we are going to try to pull together 33 years of development, if this is, or growth, if this is the right word, by starting right away at the beginning. And I am going to mention these drawings first and foremost. I was practically a beginning art student, and I made all these sketches, or let's put it this way, this is a little bit more than sketches. There are very detailed studies of my mother's eye, or as you see, my brother was the model in here. The emphasis was on a tonal approach. You describe the three-dimensionality, the roundness of the form by fine gradations of black and white. These watercolors in this case are sitting on top of drawings, so this right away solves the tonal problems, and the spirit of the whole thing is basically the same in here. So in this ensemble, I am really a kind of Andrew Wyatt, and this holds true more or less in the case of the landscape, for example. It is a very grayish painting. Colors are very harmonious, but basically tonal ranges are emphasized and not so much the individual color appearance or appearances of the object. The same thing holds true in case of my mother. Again, basically it is a dry brush painting. There is a darker ground somewhere here, or even this brownish range that you see in here. And then the light color, which is here, is very unevenly distributed, fully covered here, but only partially covered here, in order to create, again, the same kind of grayish, whitish gradations what you see in the previous drawing. Now, perhaps I should move out here. You know, this is an early self-portrait of mine. The emphasis was on form, not so much on color. All the sculptural qualities, the roundness of the nose, or the incompressibility of the forehead. These are basically painted sculptures. It's very interesting that at that time I didn't read Degas, and Degas said something to the effect, you know, that the main problem of painting is not so much color but form. Certainly in this case, this is true. Now the real break came in the early 60s, after I left Hungary, with this work in Chicago, which is basically pure abstraction, which is obviously not modeled on something which is out there visible, but uses the very elements of graphic representation, namely the lights, the textures, the kind of high contrast between light and shadow. This kind of interest in structure goes further in this self-portrait. You can see this is pretty abstract too, although it is obvious that we are talking about basically a Mediterranean landscape, and it is even more obvious in this situation which I painted in Italy, Genova, in '69, it dawned on me very quickly that I cannot use my brownish colors to respond to the different greens and different reds of the painting, so or the different blues for that matter. So I just had to throw out all the browns and start working with the complementary colors. So this kind of boldness, quote unquote, if this is the right word, goes further in this painting, or my interest in structure is quite obvious in this one, which is called Suburbia High Noon, and perhaps the most important work of this very early middle period or late useful period. I don't know exactly what would be the right terminology. It is not so much an advertisement of Ford's Mustang, but it is the American way, the American dream. It is not titled as Mustang in my backyard, because this should be the material exact title. It is called Suburbia High Noon. So we have an ideal suburbia, we have high noon, something where the sun is at the zenith, everything is clean, everything is neat, everything is shining. It's too good to be true. Perhaps we should jump back very quickly to this one, and this shows my interest in the psychological makeup, in the facial expression, in the mind of somebody who happens to be a teenager, certainly a rebellious one here. And this kind of psychological interest, we are going to see that this goes further in my portraits later. This period is covered more or less by this study by Mr. J. Gray Sweeney. As you see, this is dealing with my works between 1952 or even earlier till 85. So this is the past. I tried to give you some idea about the past, and now we have to switch books and we have to switch subjects too. This is the present show, and this is the book that deals with it. So if you are not satisfied with my explanations, quote unquote, and I wouldn't blame you, you still have a kind of last resort in this book. So with this, as much as I regret, I have to finish my first 30 years. Well, we are going to get down to the serious business of dealing with the work proper as it pertains to our period. So we are going to start right here. As you might note, the walls are not white. The works which are shown between 85 and 2000s, they are color coded. That means they sit on top of different colors. In this case, for the landscapes it's gray, and for the portraits and still lifes and the figurative work it is either light green or a kind of terracotta red. Well, I start right away with here. This is a very humble painting, shows Minnesota at its best, or if you have high heating bills, at its worst. This is winter, when life is at its lowest ebb. Pretty soon that kind of sunset is going to take over, darkness is going to get into action, and we are not so sure that this little lamp here, whether this is going to survive the kind of rule of general darkness. Now here we have again another sunset, but it is much more glorious, which is in Duluth. The sun is still out there, as you can see. The first lights of this ocean liner are just coming on. They are nicely reflected in the water. As a matter of fact, as you can see, they start bouncing, they start assuming strange little shapes in comparison to the rather fixed circles of the lamps up here. And this kind of flickering light effect prevails over the whole painting, but this is a very majestic kind of proposition, not so intimate as the previous one. All right, here we are. It is a barn in summer, late afternoon. The colors are very rich. I call this not so much the American Gothic, but American Doric. There is some kind of a stateliness, some kind of finality, some kind of classical beauty, very much comparable to the Doric churches of Greek architecture. And of course, everybody knows that these things were built by carpenters, perhaps who couldn't even sign their names. Everything is balance here, everything is harmony, everything is color at its sweetest and at its fullest. Even if you look at the relationships between the different kinds of reds, you see the kind of darker reds glowing very slowly in comparison to that kind of salmon, more intense, lighter, easygoing red, you know, more brighter, more hilarious red. If we move very quickly from this to a big vista, we can see that the contrasts are so obvious. Here, colors are much more subdued. For example, these nice pinks of the clouds, they are not allowed to become full-fledged pinks. They are lining up as a bunch of undisciplined military forces, a kind of inexperienced platoon trying to find their way. The different elements of the painting, such as these trees, are squeezing that architecture. And if you look at the details, for example, the windows, the openings, you are going to see that there is a gaping hole in here, for example. These windows look like lacerations here too. So it is a kind of suffering, a kind of discomfort, a kind of stress which is indicated here. So here we are not talking about harmony, just the other way around, the lack of it, a kind of tension, stress, something which is not totally resolved. And this doesn't mean, you know, this is a bad painting, but certainly we are moving in a different sphere of existence, a different level of consciousness, a different level of communication as in the previous one. This work here, we don't have to go to Salzburg to see this. We can be very close to our home turf, and this is St. Paul. It shares some of the brightness, some of the kind of sweet, harmonious color what we have seen in the barn painting before, except you see the water is much more agitated. The clouds are playing their own game. Now we are going to run into a little problem in the shadow here. I'm just moving this very slowly. You see, all kinds of things do happen in the sky, or if we look at the water, for example, all kinds of changes. There is nothing which is repeated here. Yes, everything is playing on a different color theme as you move across, but this needs a kind of quiet, meditative eye. Painting is not an instantaneous satisfaction. It is something what you have to slowly but surely digest, and especially the color relationships, how they try to explain the different happenings at different areas of the painting. Take a look here, for example. This is the area of the arches. It's entirely different from, let's say, the realm of the trees. You can see the kind of rather violent jumps what these tree branches are producing. They are totally oblivious of the little boat which is passing in front of them. So we see different worlds, different modes of existence, as it were. And if we don't discover these kind of little hints, distinctions, then indeed, then this is just a splash of colors. Now from St. Paul, we go to Venice, but this is Venice, Italy, not Venice, California. This is a very rare view of basically a very well-known stretch of the so-called Canal Grande. The viewer has to realize that I am standing on the so-called Academy Bridge and looking north, which is toward the Rialto. So if we would go further, using this little boat here, we can use the big one too, we would end we would pass under the Rialto, whereas the opposite direction takes us out to the Santa Maria della Salute, and this is one of the views of Venice, which is perhaps one of the nicest views of Europe, and a little bit over-painted or painted out totally. I just would like to call your attention that the light conditions in Venice are so different. There is always some kind of a golden haze, or at least some kind of a haze in the air, which is making difficult to produce very clean-cut outlines. And this is what you see in here. For example, you see, well, up to here, you see the rooftop, but then what happens in here? Everything dissolves. Here too. See, the chimney is becoming part of the sky, and the sky is becoming part of the roof. So the same way as if we move down, same way as the building is in its reflections are becoming part of the water. So the boundaries between dream and reality, between reflections, between light and shadow, this is wishy-washy. You know, it is nicely blurred, so we find ourselves in a kind of dream world which is real. Take a look, for example, how this part is reflecting the cast shadow, but in a very discrete manner, of this group of buildings, of houses. You see the edge of the cast shadow is here, and then you can see through these waves still the reflections of the different posts. So instead of looking for architectural precision, what we should look is a kind of spiritual precision. What is the spirit of the place? You know, and the painter has to be faithful to the spirit and not so much to the individual architectural details. So I can use my little miraculous device and isolate some other part of the painting. For example, this brick wall in here, which at the first sight looked like some kind of a uniform thing. You can see it is participating in this kind of changing color proposition, which we already observed in the case of the water. This is not a goldfish, you know, although it could be too, I doubt. Well, I wish I had more time. This is one of my favorite painting. But again, from Venice, we have to go to the French Riviera, and we are here in the vicinity of Marseille. This lovely spot is called Cassis, and they pronounce the S. Officially, they should not. It is really Cassis. This is Van Gogh and Cézanne's country. The mountain formations are almost mimicking the Mont Saint-Victor, and everything is just imbued, not in a hazy light like in the case of Venice, but in a kind of brilliant, I wouldn't say very cold, you know, but certainly a very radiant light, which is coming from the sky, and this is what I try to put across. Take a look at a detail of a sky, of a stretch of a sky, what is going on in here. Originally, we perceive this as a kind of little bit of a bluish sky, but if you again start scrutinizing the painting, you see that there are a zillion other colors, even slight little purples here participating. So it is a great deal of fun and at the same time instruction to see how these shafts of lights are represented by different colors and indeed by different brush strokes. So some of that radiance, I quickly jump here, is represented in the architecture too. Even the shadows are very light, you know, because there is so much light is coming, from above. The whole thing has a kind of musical quality. Why is this? Because there is a melody line indicated here. Really, the mountains are carrying the main tune, and then the tree is responding in the same manner. And not only that, but suddenly this piece of architecture becomes a ship, you know, almost like a kind of the, I don't know what's the first part of the ship, the bow of the ship, you know, with a kind of chimney. And even this nice plant is acting like a kind of ballet dancer. It is moving in the same kind of rhythm as the painting. So this is a kind of, now what kind of music is this? Certainly it is melodical and not rhythmical music. It's might even remind you, and I have to excuse myself, I'm not too much of a musician, but you know the first few bars of Tchaikovsky's piano concerto. Da la la lam din da la la ra 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 la. Okay, enough of this, you know, because I just don't want to scare you to death about my great musical abilities. But you know what I am trying to allude at. Well, from the vicinity of Marseille, we go not to the vicinity of Boston, but Boston proper. And this is the Beacon Hill. You cannot be more historical than this. For me, this was a challenge not because of the very rich historical connotations, but because of the artistic issue. See, each painting has a kind of hidden agenda, kind of artistic issue. And it was the kind of symbiotic interaction between the plants, which are very unruly, very organic, and then the architecture, which is of course very disciplined, and entirely presents itself in entirely different colors. So this is really a kind of painting where you have to chew it piece by piece, you know. For example, you can just enjoy the glowing red of this door against the faint purple of this, or the kind of hide and seek what is going on between the red brickwork, which is trying to survive among the assault or against the assault of these green leaves. Here, a bluish purple is taking the lead. Here, interestingly enough, the architecture, the color of the architecture is imitating, to a certain extent, the color of the leaves. So it is basically a kind of color harmony in red and green. with lots of nice in-between colors. Of course, an artist is never letting the so-called name colors dominate. So always we have variations. This is really the pure so-called full chroma red in here. Everything else is subdued and modified and occasionally strongly thrown in. But at this time, we are going to go to Normandy. As a matter of fact, we go to Monet's own home turf, and this is Giverny. This is his famous pond, which he invented and he realized. I am about deadly sure that he was standing exactly the same spot and painting from there where I was lucky enough to stand. This is not a kind of high sunshine, high noon kind of proposition. As a matter of fact, we see the last rays of the sun hitting and thereby making it even more exciting, because the surrounding areas are slowly but surely submerging into the darkness of the incoming night. Here we see some parts which perhaps I should move over this way. It is a kind of the magic garden, the enchanted garden, where you see the plants which emanate all kinds of magic powers or good or bad spells, where young lovers are becoming even more passionate, or I don't know, even older lovers repassionate themselves. And then you see some quiet, menacing darks. We are very clearly and very forcefully reminded that pretty soon the sinister forces, the dark passages, which are indicated here already, they are going to take over. So this kind of sense of moving from light toward dark is certainly creating a kind of sense of mystery. We go back to the safety and the warmth of high noon. And again, here, nature is at its best, at its most colorful. You see these red flowers. There is no other way how a painter can create a greater contrast, and I'm not talking about black and white, about color contrast than what you see in here with these glowing reds. Actually, the reds are not glowing that much. It is the surrounding, this dark bluish, greenish application of different very closely related colors, which makes in close proximity, of course, these reds be so intense. There are some other parts where the intensity is much less, and nevertheless the warmth and the light content, is just the same. The only part which might be mysterious, quote unquote, is perhaps here, where you see, or if you really not see so much, but sense a kind of opening. We are moving from the dark to the light, and again you see different grades. The brushstrokes have nothing to do anymore with any kind of botanically perceived leaves. It is a painting which lives by its own color, by its own elements, by the dynamism, by the directions of the different brushstrokes. And we don't expect really much more from a painting. We don't expect any kind of visual inventory, but we expect to be a total faithfulness to the mood and existential stance, so to speak, of the moment. This is a very positive and a very uplifting painting. Doesn't have that kind of melancholy resignation as the previous one. In spite of the glass, I guess we just have to do something with the acrylic paintings, which are not on canvas but on paper, and they pose different technical problems, in the sense that it is very hard to create exact, very correct color mixtures in acrylics. So it is always a guesswork because the technique dries, the paint dries differently from the original mixture. Nevertheless, in a crazy moment, I tried to do counterlight painting in acrylics in southern France. The camera just cannot handle the phenomenon of counterlight because the contrast between a radiating bright sky and the objects which are in front of it, which do not get any kind of direct light, but only reflected light, simply the fine nuances, the fine shades, the camera just cannot pick those things up. So it was a special challenge to keep the integrity of the element as houses in counterlight, and at the same time provide a variety of colors, not to make it uniformly black or uniformly dark blue. A painter cannot afford that kind of approach. So if you look at this one, you see that there is all kinds of, or there are all kinds of things, and I hope the reflections are not going to spoil the fun, but there are all kinds of subdued or subtle variations on different kinds of greens and oranges and purples. So there is never a dull moment. Even we discover a nice little statue here, or some folks who are nicely walking toward us, let alone the kind of rather great intensity of the sky. This remained intact. So don't be surprised that you see on the pavement again a kind of repetition, but in a different key of the same colors which are participating in representing the building. So this was a kind of special challenge, and it is quintessentially a painterly one. The next one here is California. It's Orange County in the vicinity of Irvine. And this raises the issue of how quickly one can paint, because these oil paintings are done in 2 or 3 sittings. That means the artist has to wait till the painting dries. Mostly, of course, we are talking about oil paintings, and then go out again, and then go out again at least 3 times. Here, acrylics dry very fast, and this allows the artist to make a full statement within 2-3 hours at the most. Now, if you have that little time, don't expect a great deal of architectural precision. So if you look at a fancy French door like this, not everything is there. It is a kind of almost stenographic kind of notation of what goes on in the carpentry work, let alone these balustrades. They didn't even get that much of a chance. Again, human perception is not equal to camera's perception. So we have a marvelous ability to complete the form. If we are pushed in the right direction, the eye, and we don't know whether the eye or the mind, both at the same time, complete the form. We don't need more information than the telling and the pointed essentials. And every detail, for example, that here we need perhaps more detail of this room, everything is going to be filled in. Same thing holds true for the reflection. Incidentally, there are some painters who would see this as a kind of finished painting. You know, you don't have to do anything. It is, the challenge is to keep the level of realism uniformly the same in the painting. Well, those people who accuse me of slighting our country here, they can be satisfied because we are back again to Minnesota, and this is Duluth. As a matter of fact, this is the same ship which we have seen before, but now treated much more sketchily, not anymore in the center, but as a kind of player of all these elements which are literally boogie-woogieing around this work. So again, this is a very quick acrylic. Sometimes you see even the paper, the white of the paper left out. Well, I am afraid with this we have to finish our quick survey of the landscapes, and we can go over to see the portraits.